Hi guys, welcome to another video. This time I'm going to show you how to install macOS on a PC. If you're new here, I normally make photography and music videos around here, but I used to repair computers for a living, so I kind of know what I'm doing. And that is also something you have to keep in mind. Installing macOS on a PC is not easy. It's not something that you can just attempt without any prior research, and you need to have the right hardware for doing it. If you don't know whether you have the right hardware, then I suggest that you watch a previous video of mine that I made about all the hardware that you need for a successful Hackintosh build. So if you're unsure about what a motherboard is, what a CPU is, a graphics card, or any of that stuff, I would suggest that you first watch that video, and I'll link it up here. And then once you've watched that, know about all the terminology, about what hardware is and so on and so forth, then you can think about installing macOS on a PC. Before you know all the other stuff, it doesn't really make sense to even attempt this. It's not easy, and you have to know exactly what kind of hardware is in your computer. You have to know the chipset, the processor, and definitely the graphics card. Otherwise, you're not gonna get it to work. So keep that in mind. I do, however, think that even a beginner can pull this off, because there's a lot of really good information out there. There are lots of resources that you can use, step-by-step videos for specific hardware, but also forums where you can ask questions and all of that stuff. So if you're a beginner and don't really know about computers, don't be discouraged or think that you can't do this. You can learn this stuff. All the information is out there. This video will show you exactly how the whole process of installing macOS works, and then you know what you're getting into before going down this path. I will keep this as simple as possible. This is not a step-by-step guide for any specific hardware. This is a general video to give you an idea of what is involved. I personally use a Gigabyte Designare Z390 motherboard with an i9900K processor and a RX 580 graphics card, but the process is very similar for all sorts of hardware. You just have to follow all the instructions for your specific hardware. So I'm going to keep this general, and it's only going to be an overview. Don't expect me to walk you through this one step at a time. A step-by-step guide would get outdated very quickly, and it would be only specific to one type of hardware, namely the one that I have, and it wouldn't be very useful to you. So I think a general overview video that just shows you what's involved could tell you a lot about whether you even want to go down this road of building a Hackintosh. The first thing we need to do is choose an operating system version. How do you actually do that? Well, it depends very much on which functions you need. Sometimes support for certain things was discontinued in a newer version. I never recommend getting the latest and greatest version of macOS, because truly it is never the greatest. Usually the latest version is always full of bugs, and I try to avoid it unless I buy a new Mac, and otherwise I try to stick with an older version because they tend to be more stable. Personally, I went with macOS Mojave because I needed 32-bit support. If you don't need that, I would suggest that you go with Catalina. It has a couple functions that I would actually quite like, but because of the 32-bit support, I can't really get it. Catalina is probably the safest bet right now, but of course this will change over time. Maybe in a while, when a new operating system version is out, Big Sur might be less of a hassle. Right now, you might run into problems still with Big Sur because there are some very big changes happening right now in the macOS world, and that always means trouble and changes and, bugs mostly. After you've chosen the operating system version you want, you just type into a search engine, download macOS version such and such, Mojave, Catalina, Big Sur, whatever, and you will get a link to the App Store where you can download this particular version. If you want to do this on Windows, you can. I personally have never done it because it's usually a lot easier if you have a machine that is already on macOS. This is the same thing if you're trying to install Windows and you only have access to macOS. That's a major headache to make a bootable installer for that. So the same thing might apply if you're trying to do this on Windows. I would suggest just asking a friend who already has a Mac or a Hackintosh and downloading it there. It's probably easier. On macOS it's really simple. You just download the operating system version you want from the App Store, and once it downloads, which might take a while, once it has downloaded, then you can make a bootable install USB stick. And again, how do you do that? Well, you just type into a search engine, make bootable install USB macOS. It's that simple. A lot of this stuff is just looking up stuff in search engines. And once you click on the first page you find, you're gonna find a terminal command that you can use to make a bootable installer. First, of course, you need to make sure that the USB stick that you're using is empty. If it's not empty, you will lose all the files that are on there, so make sure that you're choosing the right folder and the right disk. And this goes for this whole process. Always make doubly sure that you're installing on the right disk. I have learned this the hard way. I have wiped a disk once installing Windows long ago, and yeah, it involved tears. So don't do that. If the command fails, make sure that the USB stick is already formatted in macOS Extended. If you don't know how to do that, then search engines will help you with that. And this is a recurring theme here. Keep that in mind. Search engines are always the best friend when you're trying to solve any computer problem. Now, when you copy the terminal command, make sure that this is actually pointing to the right folder where your USB stick is mounted. This is usually volumes and then the name of the USB stick. Now, after that command runs through, and this might take a little while, you have a bootable installer, but this will not yet work for installing macOS. You still need to change a few more things. And what comes next is the main thing that we need to do to get this to work. It's called an EFI folder, and this contains bootloader. A bootloader is basically the part which tricks the PC into thinking it's a Mac. When the installer just runs on a PC, it's not going to work, but if there's a bootloader on that particular USB stick, then this bootloader can fool the PC into thinking that it's a Mac. So we need to make that bootloader, and it has to be specific to your particular hardware. So here you will need to know what your processor is and what your chipset of your motherboard is, and also what kind of graphics you want to use. This could be the internal graphics of your CPU, or it could be a graphics card. But you should probably decide this before installing. We now need to download two tools to get this to work. One is Mount EFI, which mounts the volume on which the bootloader is. And then there's Property, and this is a little program that allows you to edit the config files of the bootloader. Again, you just type that into a search engine and then download the newest version. And for Property, it helps to use one of the commands in a subfolder which builds it into the macOS context menu, and then you can just right click and select it. So once we have downloaded these two things, we can go to the guide to look at what we need to put into the bootloader for your specific hardware. It's important to check the guide before starting this, so that you're doing this on the right version of OpenCore. OpenCore is the bootloader, and this is the thing that we need to change so that it fits your hardware. The guide is usually only valid for the latest version of OpenCore, and you just make sure that you download that one. So from here, there are basically only two steps. One is to download all the files that are pertaining to your specific hardware, and this could include drivers and certain mappings, so that the bootloader knows where to find certain things like USB ports and that sort of thing. And then you need to change the config file to match your specific hardware. First, you need to figure out which processor you have. And once you have the processor, you need to know what it's actually called. They have these weird names called Coffee Lake and Comet Lake. You just need to put the name of your specific processor into a search engine, and then you're gonna find which weird astronaut lake, coffee lake, whatever it is. With that, then you can follow the guide. We need to download all the drivers and the kexts. Kexts are, I think, kernel extensions. And then we also need the, what is it called? ACPI? Is it called ACPI? ACPI Macintosh. Yes, indeed, it is called ACPI. So if you're not sure, just do this. Look things up if you're not sure, and that's how this works. So the ACPI folder includes all the mappings to USB or different types of hardware so that the bootloader knows where to look for this stuff. Otherwise, maybe you boot and you can't use your keyboard because none of the USB ports work, or yeah, things like that basically. So make sure that you download all the files that are recommended for your particular processor and your particular chipset. And then once you have downloaded all of these and you're done with the gathering files section of the guide, then we can move on to changing the config file of OpenCore. There's a sample plist file in the OpenCore version that you downloaded, and this one we can copy into your OpenCore folder and call it config.plist. And then we open that with the little tool that we downloaded called Propertree. First, get rid of all the warnings, remove warning. And then you notice that all the files that are in there aren't really the ones that you have in your folders. So what we need to do is to do an OC snapshot of your actual files. For this we go to OC snapshot and we choose our OpenCore folder where we've copied all our files. And that will populate all the different files that you actually have in your folders. And then you do OC clean snapshot, and that will make sure everything's activated. Once you've done that, you just have to follow the guide and change all the values as they are supposed to be for your particular system. And this is, granted, a bit tedious. It takes a while, I think about half an hour or something like that. And you go through everything and read everything carefully, and for everything where it says true or yes, you say yes and true, or false and no, and just follow all of that until you reach the bottom of the page and you've changed all the settings. Make sure that you read very carefully. Not all the settings pertain to each operating system version, so make sure that you're choosing the settings for your particular operating system version, and also you need to make sure that they're applicable to your particular chipset. Now, chipset, how do you find that out? You can put your motherboard into a search engine, and then it usually tells you which chipset it has. In my case, with the Gigabyte Designer Z390, you can already hear it in the name. It's Z390. In your case, it might be Z490 or something completely different, but it's important that you know the chipset so that you can follow the guide properly. And now, after doing all of this stuff, downloading all these files and changing the config plist, you're basically almost ready. The only thing we need to do now is use the Mount EFI tool. For this, you just click on the Mount EFI command and it will open a terminal window, and there you can select the install USB stick. Make absolutely sure that you're choosing the right disk. It's the install USB stick. And then once you've done that, you can open that EFI folder and copy what's in the EFI folder that you just made into this EFI volume on your USB stick. So now we have a boot USB stick with an installer that can fool your PC into thinking that it's a Mac, and that's what we wanted. The only thing that is left to do is to change all the BIOS setting according to what the guide needs for it. I would also suggest that when you're in the BIOS settings, you deactivate all the disks that you don't want to install to. It's even a really good choice just to unplug all the disks that you don't want to install to. That's how I do it, because you cry once because you wiped the wrong disk and you never do it again, right? Yes, it was sad I didn't have a backup. I was very young. I have backups now. So now, check the guide for all the BIOS settings that you need to change for this to work. Follow those instructions, change the settings, and once you're done, we can actually start to install macOS. First step is to put in your USB stick and cross your fingers, because this needs a bit of luck to work on the first try. Seriously, if it just works right out of the box, it's almost scary. And this happened to me my first install. It just happened, it just worked. I had no problems whatsoever, and it made me very suspicious. But sometimes this just works right away, and fingers crossed it does for you. Put in your USB stick, you boot from that. If you don't know how, then open your BIOS again, and there you can choose the USB stick. If after the BIOS you see absolutely nothing, then keep in mind that you need to be connected via an HDMI port. I once spent 4 hours trying to fix a USB stick that was working perfectly fine because it just didn't want to show on my screen. I had just changed from HDMI to DisplayPort and it would not show me anything of the installer. So theoretically it should show you a picker. This can be a graphical picker if you configured it that way. This can be just text, but it will show you a picker, and then you can select the install option. If you can't install because you can't select anything, then your keyboard settings or your USB settings are wrong. And that can be a bit of a headache to fix, but you just use the search engine and change the settings according to different things, and eventually you'll get it to work. But this is one of the things that goes wrong most often, I think, that you can't really select anything. And then once you successfully picked the install, it should start to boot, and you see all this code going down. This is normal, and this is to be expected. And if it stops at any point, the last thing that you see on the screen, and where it just gets stuck, this is the thing that you copy and put into a search engine to see what you did wrong, maybe somewhere. Make sure that you have the verbose mode in your boot arguments in your open core plist. And if you don't see any of the code and just the symbol, then you put a -v into the boot arguments, and that should show you what's going on. Now, the boot from the USB stick takes quite a while. Be patient with that. In my case, it took about 7 minutes. So that's quite long. And sometimes it looks like it got stuck, but it didn't. So just wait it out. And if it takes longer than 20 minutes, then something is wrong. So patience, but not too much patience. So once the installer has booted and you see this install screen, you wipe the disk, the right disk. Make sure the right disk. Backups help, and disabling all the disks you don't want to install to helps too. So make sure you wipe the right disk, and then once you've wiped the disk with macOS Extended, you can install macOS. And this will restart once or twice. And sometimes it might look like it got stuck. And sometimes it does get stuck. Like mine got stuck on a grey screen for quite a while. So then I just pressed the reset button and it booted again. And automatically it booted into the installer and it just continued where it left off. And after that it ran through fine. So yeah. Sometimes it's a bit glitchy, and that's okay. Just hope and fingers crossed and all of that it runs through without any further issues. If you run into any issues and you get any sort of error or anything like that, you just type it into a search engine and look whether anyone else had that problem before. And if not, and if you can't find any solutions, if you've looked everywhere and it just seems like this really obscure, weird thing that's only happening to you, then you can make a post in the forums and the people can help you solve all your problems. They are really knowledgeable. They have tried installing macOS on many different hardware systems. They know what usually goes wrong and they can usually help. So don't be afraid to ask questions after you've done your research. If you ask questions before you've done your research, they're probably going to get a bit annoyed at you because it might be just a simple thing that you could have searched for yourself in 2 minutes, and that's a bit annoying. So just try to solve it yourself first. You're also going to learn more that way. But if you're really stuck, don't hesitate to ask in the forums. With a bit of luck, everything's installed. It just boots up and then it asks you to configure your Mac. And that's when you've installed macOS on your PC. But we're not quite done yet. Not everything works yet, because the guide only shows you how to get it installed with just the basic settings. It probably won't know where all your USB ports are. It probably won't know anything additional, like if you have Thunderbolt, how to do that, or any of that stuff. So this is what we're gonna do next. A bit of warning before you continue down this path: don't log into your iCloud yet. You need to make sure that you have first generated all the right serial numbers. If you log into your iCloud with a wrong serial number or no serial number, Apple kind of frowns upon that, and if you do that sort of thing too often, they might lock your account. They usually probably know that you're on a Hackintosh, but it's better not to push it too much. So generate your serial numbers before logging into iCloud. Best skip that step until everything's configured, because you might have to change system definitions a couple times and it might cause problems. Best to get it sort of to work before you start doing all the iCloud and Bluetooth and AirDrop and all that sort of stuff. Do that last, maybe. So how do you get all this other stuff to work, like Thunderbolt and USB ports and all sorts of stuff like that? So I personally don't believe in reinventing the wheel, and people are gonna tell you not to use other people's EFI folders, but that's not quite accurate. The thing that you can't do is just copy straight up the EFI folder of someone else and expect it to work. That's probably not gonna work, because they might have a different operating system version and the texts may be wrong, or something else may be wrong for your particular operating system version. But that doesn't mean that you can't use their EFI folder to help yourself a little bit. What you need to do is just copy the right things out of it and add them to your own config plist, and also copy the right files. If you do it carefully by, for example, doing one thing at a time and rebooting in between, then that's gonna work better. But the way to do this is to never change your install USB stick. Never. Just keep it the way it is if you know it works. Keep that as a backup in case you mess anything up, otherwise you're not going to be able to boot. So how do you keep your install USB stick safe? First, you make a backup. That's always a safe thing to do. Make a backup of the EFI folder in your install USB stick. I always call it install USB stick EFI backup. And that's it. Then you have a backup to fall back on if you mess things up. Then after you've done a backup, you copy that particular EFI onto the EFI of your installed macOS system disk. For this you again use mount EFI, and instead of choosing the install disk, this time you're gonna choose your macOS disk. And there you're gonna copy everything you have in the install USB EFI, and then your macOS is gonna boot. Before you change anything else, try to boot without the install USB. If you run into any trouble and it doesn't boot without the install USB, you need to change something else. It's usually something in the config plist. Once you get that to boot, then you change only on your installed macOS disk. never change the install USB. Otherwise you're gonna run into trouble and not be able to boot, and you're gonna have to start again with the install USB stick, and it's gonna cost you a lot of time. Once you have copied the EFI onto your macOS disk, you can start making changes. And for this, you look for an EFI folder that works for someone else, but you need to find an EFI folder of someone who has exactly the same hardware, same mainboard, same CPU preferably, same graphics card preferably. And in my case, since I chose a golden build, that was relatively easy, and I found an EFI folder that was exactly the same as my build. I found the EFI folder that worked for me in a German Hackintosh forum, and it worked for me for the last half year, so that's really good. And they always updated to the newest OpenCore version too, so that's really super helpful. And you can find EFI folders like that are well maintained, and if you're careful, you can copy from them. How do you do that? Well, you do it carefully, one folder at a time. It's usually safe to copy the ACPI folder straight up. Then after you've rebooted and confirmed that this works, you can test already whether some hardware stuff works at this point. This should already sort out your USB mapping, and with that probably also your Bluetooth if you have a Wi-Fi Bluetooth card, and some other stuff might be also there. You can also copy the drivers and some of the kexts, but don't replace the ones that you have in yours. If it asks you to replace, then say skip. You don't want to replace the files that you already have in there, only the ones that you don't have in there. And this now should solve the problems of that you don't see any temperatures when you're looking at iStat menus or stuff like that. And now the last step is also to check the config plist of that particular EFI folder you downloaded, and check for any changes that you could add. This would, for example, be PCI Express entries, and this could sort out your Thunderbolt or whatever else is not working in your PCI Express. The other thing you can do is to check the boot arguments and maybe copy anything from that. This can maybe sort out sleep or the graphics acceleration. If at some point it doesn't work, then just go back to the previous step and don't change that particular thing. And that's how you use an EFI folder to get your hardware to work. In my case, after I did all of that with the EFI folder that I found in the German Hackintosh forum, everything worked. I had Thunderbolt working, all my USB ports worked, the Bluetooth worked. It's a great EFI folder, and I'm always grateful that there are so many knowledgeable people sharing what they managed to figure out with their own Hackintosh builds, and it's a really good resource to have. Just remember, never copy an EFI folder just like that. Make sure you copy only the relevant files. Now, if you run into any problems whatsoever with getting anything to work, it's always helpful to just check the forums, check a golden build post. They might not always be relevant because they might be for a different bootloader. There used to be other ones like Clover, for example. I don't think it's used anymore or supported anymore, but that used to be the one that everyone used, and now it's OpenCore. So you have to make sure that everything you find in solutions is actually relevant for your bootloader. And if it doesn't work, don't worry about it, maybe there's another solution. And it always helps to just ask in the forums if you run into something that is not solvable at all. Most of the stuff I could figure out without any forum questions, but sometimes you run into really obscure things that are very particular to your build, and then the people in the forums can be really helpful, and they tend to be very friendly about it too. I personally think it's a very friendly and nice community, and they help each other out with all these different builds and try to figure out what the issue is with even the most obscure little problems. In my case, I didn't need much in the way of help because the EFI folder I found was so great, and generally picking a golden build or a successful build in hardware already makes sure that it's not going to be that hard. Another little note on getting stuff to work: if something does not work, for example the GPU acceleration for you, in my case I only got H.264 to work at first, and then I used the search engine again, and I figured out that it was my system definition. I had to use a different iMac version definition, and then I got H.265 to work as well. This might cause other problems, like I think that if you use one system definition you can't use certain DRM files and maybe watch Netflix in a certain way, and there are always weird counter effects with certain things, but it helps to try around with that. So if you cross your fingers sufficiently and you did all your research well by selecting the right hardware and by following all the guides properly and choosing not the latest and greatest version and so on and so forth, then you have now a working macOS installation. And maybe you learned quite a bit along the way too, because it didn't quite work right away. In my case, I seem to have been very lucky. I didn't have to really do much in the way of troubleshooting. Sorting out sleep was a bit of a headache, but I got it to work in the end. This was a bit more involved. I suggest that you use a search engine to figure that out, because it would require a whole nother video to explain that. And yeah, some things might be a little tedious to sort out, but yeah, the thing is with sleep on Mac, that's a headache even on real Macs. I never got my MacBooks to sleep properly. They always had some sort of weird thing where I realized that in the middle of the night they were on for some reason, and they always do that. So sleep is always a bit of a with Macs, but it generally works okay. If you have trouble with that, check the Bluetooth settings. Wake on Bluetooth has to be off, wake on network has to be off, that sort of thing. The other issue that has to be resolved is if you have very fast RAM memory and you have overclocked it in your BIOS setting. This is this XMP profile thing. If you've done that, it might be that external disks might be not ejected properly on sleep. If you don't eject external disks properly, then they might get corrupted over time, so you don't want to do that. If this happens, you can turn off the XMP profile. I don't really do that. I just prefer to use all the speed I get, because I do video editing and I need speed for that. So what I did was, instead of using external disks, I put an internal disk into the machine. There may be other solutions for that problem too. You just have to figure it out in the forums and look for your particular problems that you want to fix. Other things might not be that important to you, like maybe you don't use external disks, maybe you don't use Bluetooth, maybe you don't even use the sleep function all that much, and that's your individual choices of what you need to get to work and what you don't need to get to work. Now, if anyone tells you not to use other people's EFIs and to do all the mapping yourself and so on and so forth, they're technically right, because you're gonna know better how to do that and what it takes and so on. But doing all this by hand is a lengthy process, and yes, it's something for people who enjoy that sort of thing. If you just want to use your Hackintosh and not fiddle with it all the time, you don't really need to do it the hard way. The hard way is for people who enjoy this sort of thing. There are many people who enjoy it. The whole Hackintosh community is full of people who enjoy tinkering with this stuff, and that's how they figured it all out. I personally like to just use my machine. I use it for all the different things I do, like video editing and photo editing and all this sort of stuff. And I don't really have time to fiddle with it for hours to get a single thing to work, when I can just use someone else's EFI folder who has already done all the work for us and shared their knowledge. I know that this may be a little controversial, but I don't really believe in reinventing the wheel when you don't have to. So now we have a working macOS installation and everything works, the Thunderbolt works and everything works. I'm very happy with it. I've been using this machine for about half a year now, a bit longer now, and I've redone my EFI folder to the newest version now, and every now and then I do that if I want to stay up to date and want to maybe make an update, like system update. And this is one thing that you need to be really careful about with system updates. Please make sure to turn off automatic updates, because they can break things. Don't just leave them on and hope for the best. It's not gonna work out for the best. In my case, I once was very brave, and read that as stupid. I was very brave and clicked just update when there were 2 updates selected, and that alone broke the Hackintosh installation. And since I didn't have a bootable backup at that time, I had to reinstall the whole thing again and all my software, so that wasn't great. If you want to make an update, make sure you're on the latest OpenCore version, and make sure to only do 1 update at a time. And also, before you do the latest update, like anything that came out yesterday, check first whether it runs through with someone else. Like, check the forums whether this update is safe. If you don't, you're gonna break your installation. And to prevent your installation from being broken, I would always suggest that you have a backup drive. How do you make a backup drive? You make an exact copy of your installed macOS drive, and you also have to make a copy of the EFI folder. Once you have that, the exact copy, and you can use any program you want for it. If you have an exact copy with a working EFI folder, you can just plug in that hard drive instead of the one that you were using before that you just broke with your update, and you can boot from that and maybe fix whatever you broke. So before every update, make sure you have a backup. I learned that the hard way. And then the question is, of course, do you need all these updates? No, not really. I mean, some of them are security updates, and it's kind of, advisable to do them. I used to work in IT support, and yeah, it's advisable to do them. But personally, I don't really do them that often. I just try to not click on fishy emails and not download things from strange places, and then you're usually quite safe, even if you're not on the latest system update. Just be careful while browsing the web, and then you don't need to have the hassle of doing every single update. Do them every now and then, but you don't have to do them the day they come out. It's not like with Windows, where you have a major disaster if you don't do an update. Also, Windows doesn't allow you to skip updates. Yeah, Windows, right? What if you want to have Windows on your machine too? Well, ideally, you would install the Windows after you installed macOS. This is usually not the way people do it though. Just make sure that your Windows disk is not connected when you're installing macOS. Once you plug it in again, you might just get lucky and it might just start from inside of OpenCore. OpenCore tends to see other installations like Windows, and you can just start them. People recommend not to do that because it does something weird to the system definitions, I think. And you might see odd devices in your system information in Windows. Personally, I have never had a problem with that. I always start out of OpenCore and no problem with that. If you have Windows on one of these drives and you just want to have a volume with macOS, I would suggest you stop what you're doing and don't go this way. It's the path to doom. Don't install macOS on the same disk as Windows. This is always gonna go wrong. Don't. Even if you have a partition, even if you think that's safe, it's not. You don't want to do that. Windows is just gonna overwrite your bootloader each time it makes an update. You don't want that. Make sure you have Windows on a separate disk. Don't install macOS on the same disk as Windows. It's a recipe for disaster. And if your Windows suddenly out of nowhere wipes your EFI even though it's on a different disk, then make sure that your Windows disk is the first one that is plugged into your main board on the first board. Windows always wants to see the system disk as the first one, and it might just overwrite the EFI on the first disk it finds. That operating system is just that dumb that it just wipes whatever it finds first sometimes. So make sure that you have the Windows drive as the first one that is recognized in the BIOS, but always boot from the macOS drive, and then you can just choose an OpenCore which system you want to boot. That's how I do it anyway. Other people might do it differently, but this has worked for me for the last half year, and it's a reliable way of running Windows and macOS at the same time. So how well does this machine run? It's very reliable, it's very stable. Don't have problems with crashes or anything like that. I haven't noticed any incompatibilities. I haven't had any problems with it whatsoever. And next time I'm going to share all my benchmarks with you. I'm also going to share my day-to-day experiences with it, editing pictures, editing videos, 3D printing, 3D modeling, making music, all stuff like that. And if you're interested in these kinds of benchmarks, make sure that you stick around for those. And if this video is already out, I will link it up here. Now, if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comment section below and I will try to help out if I can. I can't promise that I can help because Hackintoshing is very specific to your particular hardware. And I have only installed macOS on my particular hardware. So maybe you have very obscure problems that I don't know about, or you have an operating system version that I've not used yet. So I might not be able to help. But maybe someone else in the comment section can help, and well, it's worth a try. It is usually better to ask in the forums because those people really know what they're doing and they've done a great job in collecting all this information, and these are the people who keep the Hackintosh community running. And I'm very grateful to all the people who've done work on collecting EFI folders and collecting all the information in the forums, and the people who make the guides. They make this stuff possible, and this is how I had this machine running successfully for such a long time now. I'm very happy with it, and I'm grateful to the Hackintosh community for making this possible. I really enjoyed the process. It's fiddly, it can be frustrating, yes, but if it works, it's great. And I also learned a lot about macOS in the process, so it was a great learning experience too. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. It really helps out my channel and I would really appreciate it. If you would like to see more videos like this one, you can also consider supporting me on Ko-fi. This computer was actually partially funded by support on Ko-fi because my old computer broke at a very inopportune time, and your support helped me to buy this machine before the chip shortage started in earnest, so I managed to buy this before it became way too expensive. Thank you again for all your support. It really makes a huge difference to what I do, and none of my videos would be possible without your support on Ko-fi. Now, in the future, you can expect more videos like this one, at least one of them. The next one will be about all my benchmarks of this machine. Other than that, there's gonna be more photography related stuff coming, but also some music related DIY content because I've been very busy with that lately and I would like to share it with you soon. So if you're into that sort of thing, I would be happy to have you here, and I hope I see you soon for another video. Bye! And now, after dueling all of... Dueling? No, you don't need to duel anyone. I found the EFI folder that worked. What's wrong with this dog? Hackintosh worked for me, and the last step that you can also do